On a stormy night, poor scavenger Giselle rescues a wounded stranger from the garbage, never guessing he's a lost millionaire. Their bond of kindness soon faces betrayal, secrets, and love tested by fate. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments. The city was a labyrinth of narrow alleyways and broken dreams, where the only things that seemed to stay constant were the endless rain and the trash that piled up like forgotten hopes. Giselle pedaled through the storm, her worn bicycle struggling against the heavy weight of the cart hitched to it. Her raven black hair clung to her pale face, the rain mingling with the dirt on her skin. She was a scavenger, nothing more, nothing less, and the city, with its cold indifference, had taught her to survive by finding what others discarded. Tonight, however, the storm seemed different. The air felt charged, almost as if the rain itself was hiding something, a secret waiting to be uncovered. Her tires splashed through the puddles that formed along the cracked streets as she made her way down the alley. It was a familiar route, one she had traveled countless times, where each dumpster, each broken cardboard box, was like a landmark in the map of survival she had learned to read. The sound of the rain was deafening, but amidst the drumming of water against concrete, there was something else, a low, almost imperceptible groan. Giselle slowed, her breath catching in her throat. At first, she thought it was the wind, but when the sound repeated itself, she couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was wrong. Turning the corner, she saw him. Sprawled out among torn bags of garbage, his body crumpled like an abandoned doll, was a man. His suit, once elegant, was now drenched and torn at the sleeve, a stark contrast to the filth that surrounded him. His hair, a mess of golden strands, was matted with rain and grime. His face, though battered, had a sharpness to it that could have once belonged to a prince. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, features that might have been admired if they weren't now soiled by the harshness of the alley. Blood trickled from a gash on his temple, pooling beneath him like a dark mirror. Giselle's heart thudded in her chest as she stared at the man. He didn't belong here, not in the muck and squalor that was her world. This man, he was something else entirely, something more. The voice inside her head warned her to turn around, to leave him there as she had seen so many others left to their own devices. But another voice, softer, almost a whisper, urged her to stop. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. Kindness is never wasted, Giselle. It's the only currency that grows. Taking a deep breath, Giselle dismounted her bike and approached him cautiously, her shoes squelching in the wet ground. She knelt beside him, her fingers brushing against the cold fabric of his suit. His chest rose and fell unevenly, but it was a sign he was still alive, and that was enough to push her forward. "Hey," she called softly, her voice almost swallowed by the sound of the rain. No response. She tried again, this time reaching out to touch his shoulder. The moment her hand made contact, he let out a faint groan, his head lolling to one side. He was alive. Barely. She bit her lip, her mind racing. What if he was dangerous? What if he was just another drunk or a criminal? Someone who would harm her in the chaos of the night. But the gold watch on his wrist glinted faintly in the dim light, its surface scratched, but still bearing the mark of wealth. That single detail tugged at something inside her, something both curious and cautious. "I can't just leave him here," she muttered to herself, knowing she had no choice but to act. If she didn't help him, no one else would. The alley was too forgotten, too far from the city's busy streets for anyone to care. With a grunt, Giselle hooked her arms under his shoulders, dragging his limp body toward her cart. His weight was more than she expected, and for a moment she stumbled, almost losing her grip. The rain battered her back, soaking through her jacket as she fought to maneuver him into the cart, pushing aside the bottles and scraps she had collected throughout the day. His head lolled to the side, his breathing shallow. But he wasn't fully unconscious. His lips parted, and another faint groan escaped him. "Hold on," she whispered, more to herself than to him, as she struggled to adjust his body in the cart. The journey back to her shack felt like an eternity. The rain never let up, and the cart's wheels creaked with every turn, as though protesting the extra weight. Giselle's legs burned with effort, her sneakers slipping on the slick pavement as she pedaled harder, desperate to get them both to safety. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and decay, and her heart raced in her chest. She had no idea who this man was, no idea what kind of life he had led before this moment. But something inside her told her that helping him would change everything. Whether it was for better or for worse, she didn't know, but she couldn't turn away. When the shack finally came into view, she almost felt a sense of relief. The small, ramshackle building was a far cry from the warmth and comfort that some people might take for granted, but it was hers. It was the only place she had ever known, a fragile home built from scraps of plywood and tarp. She dragged the man inside, the door creaking on its hinges as she pushed through with one last burst of energy. The floor was cold, the air damp, but she made a space on the mattress for him, gently laying him down. His face, even more striking up close, seemed so out of place in the bleakness of her tiny home. Giselle didn't know what would happen next. She didn't even know if he would survive the night. But for now, she lit a candle, the flickering flame casting soft shadows over the room, and began to clean the blood from his temple with a damp rag. As she worked, her mind drifted, wondering who he was and what had brought him here, to this forgotten corner of the city. His clothes spoke of wealth, his watch of status, but there was nothing regal about the way he lay in her tiny shack, so far removed from the world of luxury he must have known. His eyes fluttered, and Giselle froze, her heart skipping a beat. Was he waking up? Would he remember who he was? What if he was angry when he found out where he was, with her? And then, almost as if the world itself was conspiring to answer her, a low, hoarse voice broke the silence. "Where am I?" he murmured, his eyes still closed, his voice thick with confusion. Giselle's breath caught, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let the silence hang between them, both of them unsure of what to say next. Finally, after a long pause, she spoke, her voice steady but soft. "You're safe, for now." And so, in that small shack, with the rain still hammering against the roof, the mystery of the man she had found began to unfold. The days that followed were a blur of rain and quiet moments. Giselle spent her nights beside him, tending to his wounds and watching the flicker of the candlelight cast shadows on his pale, unfamiliar face. She had no idea who he was, but something about him felt different, like he carried a past that was both broken and beautiful. His breathing steadied, and over the next few days, he began to show signs of returning to consciousness, although his memory remained lost. He would sometimes wake with a jolt, his eyes wide with confusion, as if the weight of the world had descended on him all at once, only to find himself in her humble shack. Each time, Giselle would offer him water, and each time, he would thank her, though he never remembered her name. Despite his confusion, the man, who she still called Max, wasn't difficult to care for. He seemed grateful for everything, even for the simplest things, like a crust of stale bread or a cup of tea made from the herbs she scavenged. He never complained, not once, though his eyes sometimes clouded with a longing that Giselle couldn't quite place. Still, his presence in her life was an odd comfort. The shack, which had always felt too small, now seemed less lonely with him there. He would watch her in silence as she sorted through the piles of recyclables outside, his blue eyes following her every movement. When he could, he would help, though his coordination was clumsy at first, as if his body had forgotten how to function in the world he used to inhabit. Giselle didn't mind. There was something about him that made the chores feel less tedious. His gentle demeanor, the way he would catch the bottles she tossed to him, even his soft chuckle when he missed, all of it made her feel less like she was alone in the world. They worked side by side, the rain their only companion, and as the days turned into weeks, they began to fall into an easy rhythm. There was a quiet peace that settled between them, a bond formed not out of words, but of shared silence and understanding. One evening, as they sat in the dim glow of the candle, the silence between them stretched longer than usual. The storm had passed, and the air had a heavy stillness, as though everything around them was holding its breath. Max was looking out the small, cracked window, his gaze distant. His expression, though calm, was one of deep thought, like he was piecing together fragments of a forgotten past. Giselle, not wanting to disturb him, busied herself with cleaning the small space, but she couldn't ignore the way his blue eyes seemed to search the darkness, as if waiting for something or someone to come back to him. "Max, are you all right?" she asked softly, finally breaking the silence. He turned to her slowly, as though her voice had snapped him out of a trance. He smiled faintly, though there was an emptiness behind it, a sadness that she couldn't quite place. "I don't remember much," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from days of disuse. "But sometimes it feels like there's someone I should remember, but I can't." Giselle's heart twisted. She had heard the same words from him before, but this time they carried more weight. She wanted to say something comforting, but the truth was, she didn't know how to help him find what he had lost. His memory was a vast, dark ocean, and she was just a boat trying to stay afloat in it. "You'll remember," she said softly, trying to reassure him, though the uncertainty in her voice betrayed her. "It's like the storm, Max. The rain stops and the sky clears. Sometimes it just takes time." Max didn't reply. He only nodded, his gaze turning back to the window as if searching the dark for answers. Giselle watched him for a long moment, her thoughts swirling with questions she didn't dare ask. Who was he? What had brought him to this alley, to her shack, in such a broken state? She didn't know, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to know. For now, he was hers to care for, and that was enough. As the days passed, Max's memory seemed to return in flashes, brief moments when something would spark in his eyes, as though a piece of his life had come back to him. He would wake in the middle of the night, his body tense, as though he had had a nightmare. Giselle would watch him, waiting for him to calm down, offering a hand if he needed it. But he never spoke of his dreams. It was as if the past he had lost was too painful to bring back. One afternoon, as they sorted through the recyclables outside, Max asked a question that caught Giselle off guard. "Do you think I had a family?" he asked, his voice quiet, as though the question itself carried a weight he didn't understand. Giselle paused, looking at him with a mixture of sympathy and caution. "I don't know," she said carefully. "But I think you're someone important, Max. Someone who mattered to a lot of people." He looked at her for a long moment, the silence stretching between them. "Maybe," he murmured, his voice distant again. "But right now, I think the only thing that matters is that I'm here, and I'm not alone." Those words hung in the air, and Giselle's chest tightened with something she couldn't name. She didn't know what Max had been before, but in that moment, she realized that it didn't matter. He was here, with her, and for now, that was enough. The days drifted on, and as time passed, Giselle found herself growing attached to him in a way she hadn't expected. She found herself watching him more closely, noticing the little things, the way his eyes would crinkle when he smiled, the way he would always pick up the broken pieces of glass that she missed, his eagerness to help her with everything, despite his lack of memory. In return, he seemed to become more comfortable in her world. His movements grew less stiff, more fluid, and he even started making small jokes, though they were always laced with an underlying sadness. It was one of those quiet moments, in the midst of their routine, that Giselle caught herself wondering what would happen if he never remembered. What if Max, the man she had come to care for, never regained his identity? Would he stay with her, a stranger with no past, or would he leave once the fragments of his memory returned? The thought gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside, choosing to live in the moment instead of worrying about what the future might hold. For now, they were two broken people, finding solace in each other's company, in the quiet rhythm of their lives. It wasn't much, but it was real. And sometimes, in a world like theirs, that was enough. The storm had passed, leaving behind a humid stillness that hung in the air, thick with the scent of wet earth. Giselle watched Max as he sat near the small window, his gaze distant, his eyes tracing the lines of the alleyway beyond. There were moments, fleeting and brief, when she could see the fragments of his past trying to claw their way back to the surface. It was as if his mind were a shattered mirror, each piece broken and scattered, waiting to reflect something he couldn't quite reach. But today, something felt different. There was a shift in the air, a heaviness that pressed on her chest, as though Max was finally ready to confront the shadows of his forgotten life. She had been working quietly, sorting through the scrap metal and broken glass outside, when she heard him speak, his voice low, almost inaudible, as if he was speaking more to himself than to her. "I remember a name." Giselle's hands froze, the sharp edge of a tin can pressing too hard against her palm. She looked up, her heart skipping a beat. "A name," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Max's eyes flickered towards her, and for the first time in days, there was something sharp in his gaze, something more aware. "Yes," he said slowly, as though testing the word in his mouth. "Ulysses. That's the name I remember." The word hung in the air between them, its weight both familiar and foreign. Giselle's breath caught in her throat, her mind racing. Ulysses. It was a name that seemed to carry an air of nobility, a name that didn't belong to the broken man she had been caring for. But she didn't question him. She didn't dare. Instead, she simply nodded, her heart pounding in her chest, as she watched him try to piece together more of the puzzle that was his past. Over the next few days, Ulysses began to recall more pieces of his life, though they were fragmented and jumbled, like a puzzle missing half its pieces. He remembered flashes, short bursts of images that appeared to him in dreams or while he was awake, moments that seemed both distant and terrifyingly close. He would wake in the middle of the night, gasping for air, his face contorted in fear. Giselle would watch him, her heart aching, wondering what kind of nightmares haunted him. Sometimes, she would reach out to touch his arm, her hand gentle and steady, grounding him in the present, but Ulysses would simply nod, as if to reassure himself that he was here, with her, and that was all that mattered. One evening, as they sat together by the small stove, the flickering light casting shadows across the walls, Ulysses spoke again. "I remember something else," he said, his voice strained. Giselle looked up from the pot of soup she was stirring, her hands trembling slightly. "What?" she asked softly, setting the spoon down. I remember being someone important, someone who had power, wealth." His voice trailed off, and for a moment, Giselle didn't know what to say. The man she had come to know, this quiet, humble figure who had been slowly recovering under her care, was beginning to reveal a different side of himself. The past he had been running from seemed to be catching up with him, piece by piece, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready," Giselle said, her voice gentle. She didn't want to push him, Not when he was so fragile, so vulnerable. But Ulysses seemed determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant facing the pain that came with it. "I'm trying to make sense of it," he said, his gaze far away. "I don't remember everything, but I know I had a life that isn't here, not in this place." His eyes met hers then, and for a moment they were filled with a sadness that seemed to carry the weight of years, of regrets and unspoken truths. The next day, Ulysses went quiet again, retreating into himself as he sat by the window, staring out at the bleak horizon. Giselle didn't press him for answers, but she couldn't help the nagging feeling that something was changing between them. The more he remembered, the more distant he seemed. It was as if the man he was before, the man of wealth and power, was slipping away, leaving behind a stranger she was still trying to understand. It wasn't until a few days later, as they were walking through the alley to collect scraps, that Ulysses suddenly stopped. Giselle turned, confused, and watched as he knelt down, his fingers brushing over something on the ground. It was a small, crumpled business card, stained with dirt and rain. His fingers trembled as he picked it up, his eyes scanning the name printed on it. "Vanderbilt Enterprises," he muttered under his breath, his voice thick with disbelief. Giselle's heart skipped a beat. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice quiet. Ulysses stood up slowly, his face pale, the card clenched tightly in his hand. "It's my company," he said, the words coming out in a low, hollow tone. "Vanderbilt Enterprises. I was the CEO." His hands shook, and Giselle stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "But what happened?" she asked softly, though she feared the answer. Ulysses' eyes filled with confusion, pain, and something darker, anger. "I don't remember," he said, his voice barely a whisper, as if the truth was too much for him to bear. "But I know I lost it all. I lost everything." The pieces were finally beginning to fall into place, but they didn't make the picture any clearer. Ulysses, or whoever he had been, wasn't just a man lost to the streets. He was someone who had once held power, who had once ruled a world that was far removed from the one Giselle knew. And yet here he was, a man with no past, no future, clinging to the fragile hope that he could piece it all back together. Over the following days, Ulysses seemed to retreat even further into himself, as though the more he remembered, the more shattered he became. Giselle, though concerned, didn't press him. She knew that some battles couldn't be fought in one day. But as she watched him struggle with the remnants of his past, she couldn't shake the feeling that something much darker was waiting for him, something he wasn't yet ready to face. The truth had been set in motion, and now there was no turning back. The past was returning piece by piece, and with it came the weight of the choices he had made, and the man he was meant to become. The days that followed were filled with a growing tension that hung like a storm cloud over the small shack. The more Ulysses pieced together his past, the more he seemed to pull away, as though the man he had been was a ghost that no longer fit the life he was now living. Giselle could feel it too, the distance between them growing, stretching wider with every passing day, even though they spent nearly every moment together. She tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself that it was just his memory returning. But deep down, she knew the truth. Something inside him was shifting, and it wasn't something she could fix. Ulysses had become more distant, his eyes often clouded with thoughts that he refused to share, his answers to her questions more curt and less certain. The card he had found, the one that bore the name Vanderbilt Enterprises, had triggered something in him, something he couldn't explain. And the more he tried to chase the fragments of his old life, the more he seemed to unravel. Every night, as they sat in the flickering candlelight, the weight of his unspoken thoughts pressed heavily in the room, and Giselle could feel the walls he was building around himself. That evening, as the sky outside darkened and the first cracks of thunder rolled across the horizon, Ulysses sat by the small window, staring out into the storm, his hands clenched into fists. Giselle, watching him from across the room, felt a pang of concern. "Max," she called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't turn to her at first, his focus fixed on the sheets of rain that blurred the alleyway. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, as though the words had been buried for far too long. "I can't keep living like this, Giselle," he said, his words barely audible over the roar of the storm outside. This isn't who I am. I wasn't meant for this life. I was someone else. Someone with a future, a purpose." He turned to her then, his eyes intense, almost desperate. "I remember what I had. I had everything, and now I have nothing. I don't even know who I am anymore." Giselle felt a sharp sting in her chest, but she held her ground. She had always known this moment would come. The moment when he would remember too much and feel the pull of the life he had lost. She had been waiting for it. But now that it was here, she didn't know what to say. She wanted to tell him that he was still the same man, that his past didn't have to define who he was now. But she knew that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to erase the weight of his regrets, the feeling that he had somehow failed. "You can stay here," Giselle said softly, her voice trembling with the weight of her own words. "You don't have to go back to that life. You don't have to be anyone else. You're someone here, Max. You're someone to me." But Ulysses shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. "No," he said, his voice low, almost pained. "You don't understand. I can't just pretend that this life doesn't exist. I can't live in your world, Giselle. Not when I know what I lost. I was part of something bigger, something important." His eyes seemed to search for something in hers, as if looking for an answer he didn't want to find. "I belong in that world, and I need to go back. I have to." Giselle felt a lump form in her throat, the words she wanted to say choking in her chest. She knew, deep down, that this day would come. He wasn't meant to stay in this shack, living a life of quiet survival, not when the world he had left behind was so much bigger, so much more alluring. But she hadn't expected it to happen so soon. She hadn't expected him to decide so firmly, so decisively, that he would walk away from everything they had built, from everything they had shared. "You can't just leave," Giselle said, her voice a mix of frustration and pain. "You can't just walk out after everything we've been through, after everything I've done for you." Her hands trembled as she clutched them together, trying to steady herself. "You're not just leaving a life behind, Ulysses. You're leaving me." He winced at the rawness in her voice, and for a moment his expression faltered. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words seemed to die before they could escape. Instead, he stood up slowly, his hands running through his wet hair, as if the weight of his decision was too much to bear. "I don't want to hurt you, Giselle," he said, his voice hoarse. "But I need to do this. I need to find out who I was, what I was supposed to be. If I don't, I'll never be able to move on." Giselle watched him, her heart breaking as he spoke. She had known this moment would come, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. He was leaving her, leaving the life they had created together in this small, forgotten corner of the city. She wanted to stop him, to plead with him to stay, but she knew she couldn't. She couldn't ask him to give up everything, to stay in a life that wasn't his, just because she didn't want to be alone again. "You've already given me so much," Giselle said, her voice soft but resolute. "You've shown me kindness when no one else would. But if you need to leave, then go. I won't stop you. But don't think for 1 second that it's easy for me. Don't think that I won't miss you." Because I will." Ulysses turned to her, his expression unreadable, and for a moment, he looked like he was about to say something, something that might make everything better, something that might make him stay, but the words never came. Instead, he reached for the gold watch on his wrist, the same one she had noticed when she first found him, and slowly, almost reluctantly, removed it. He held it out to her, his fingers trembling. "Take it," he said quietly. "It's all I have left of the man I was." Giselle's eyes filled with tears as she took the watch from his hand, the cold metal pressing into her palm. "You don't have to leave, Ulysses," she whispered. "You don't have to go." But he didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked toward the door, pausing just before he stepped out into the rain-soaked night. "Goodbye, Giselle," he said, his voice thick with emotion. And then he was gone. Giselle stood there, the weight of his absence already settling over her, and she realized in that moment that she had lost him. Not because he had left her physically, but because he had left a part of himself behind, a part of him that would never be the same again. And so, in the silence that followed, all she could do was hold on to the gold watch in her hand, knowing that some things, some people, were never meant to stay. The rain had stopped, but the emptiness in Giselle's shack was deafening. The quiet, punctuated only by the sound of her breathing, heavy with the weight of loss. Ulysses, no, Max, had walked away, leaving behind a void that was impossible to fill. She had watched him go, unable to stop him, even though her heart had shattered with each step he took away from her. For days, she didn't leave the shack, too lost in the silence to even think about the future. She had cared for him, helped him heal, and in return, he had given her pieces of himself, pieces that had now been taken away. Giselle found herself staring out of the cracked window, watching the city move on without her. The world outside was bustling with life. Vendors calling out, children running through the streets, the hum of distant traffic. But here, inside her small home, there was nothing but the echo of her heartbeat. She had always known that Ulysses, or Max, or whoever he was, could never stay in this world forever. She had always known that his past would come for him, just as it had come for him now. But that knowledge didn't make it any easier. It didn't stop the ache that gnawed at her chest, the feeling that she had lost something precious, something irreplaceable. As the days wore on, she forced herself to move, to do the things she had done before. She gathered the recyclables, sorted through the scraps, and kept busy, anything to keep the loneliness at bay. But even amid her work, her thoughts kept drifting back to Ulysses. What was he doing now? Where had he gone? Had he found what he was looking for? She hadn't heard from him, and part of her feared that she never would. The man she had cared for, the man who had been so gentle, so kind, had disappeared into the world he had once belonged to, and she was left with only memories. Then, one evening, just as she was beginning to lose herself to the endless cycle of thoughts, a figure appeared at the edge of her vision. She had been sorting through a pile of broken bottles when she noticed a shadow moving in the alleyway. At first, she thought it was just another passerby, someone from the neighborhood. But when she looked up, her heart skipped a beat. It was him. Ulysses standing there in the rain, his face worn and tired, but his eyes locked onto hers with a sense of urgency she had never seen before. "Giselle," he called, his voice rough and strained, as if the very act of speaking was difficult. She stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected him to come back. "Ulysses," she whispered, taking a step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "What are you doing here?" He took a few hesitant steps toward her, his expression torn between something close to relief and something darker, more uncertain. "I couldn't stay away," he said, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "I had to come back. I couldn't keep running from it. From who I am." His eyes searched hers, as if looking for something she couldn't quite understand. "I've been trying to remember everything, to make sense of it all, but I can't do it alone." Giselle felt a flicker of hope, mixed with confusion and fear. She had no idea what he meant, but the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. He wasn't just here for answers. He was here because he needed something from her, something she hadn't been prepared to give. She had spent so many nights wondering what had happened to him, whether he was lost forever in his past. But now he was here, standing before her, asking for help. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she knew that she couldn't turn him away, no matter how much she had already lost. "Come inside," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. "You're soaked. We'll figure this out." She led him into the shack, the door creaking as it swung open. Ulysses stepped inside, his wet shoes leaving tracks on the wooden floor, and she quickly closed the door behind him, shutting out the storm that still raged outside. For a long moment, they simply stood there in the dim light, neither one of them knowing exactly what to say. The tension between them was thick, almost palpable, as if the air itself was waiting for something to break. Finally, Ulysses spoke again, his voice quieter this time, almost apologetic. "I've been to the city," he began, his eyes downcast. "I went to the place where I used to live, the company, everything. But when I walked through those doors, nothing felt right. I don't belong there anymore, Giselle. I'm not the man I was. I'm not the person they think I am." He paused, as if searching for the right words. "I don't know who I am anymore, but I know one thing. I don't want to keep running." Giselle could see the pain in his eyes, the way he was struggling to reconcile the man he had been with the man he was now. She could see the weight of his past on his shoulders, but she also saw something else, something fragile and raw, something that spoke to the vulnerability he had never allowed himself to show before. And in that moment, something inside her softened. She knew that she had to help him, that she couldn't let him disappear again, not without knowing that he had truly found himself. "You don't have to do it alone," Giselle said, her voice calm but firm. She stepped closer to him, reaching out to gently touch his arm. "You don't have to be that person again. You can be who you are now, Ulysses. Who do you want to be?" Her words felt like a promise, one that she wasn't sure she could keep, but it was the only thing she knew to say. He looked at her, his gaze filled with gratitude and something deeper, something that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. "I want to find out who I am, Giselle," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And I want to do it with you," she nodded, a mixture of hope and fear swirling within her. This was it, the moment when everything could change. She had spent so much time trying to move on from him, from the man he had been. But now, standing here with him, she realized that they both had something to find. Not just him, but her too. They had been lost in their ways, but maybe, together, they could begin to find their way back. And so, as the storm raged outside, they sat down together, two souls that had been broken and rebuilt, ready to face whatever the future held. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like they were ready to walk it side by side. The rain had finally stopped, but the weight of the storm lingered in the air, thick with uncertainty. Ulysses, or Max, sat across from Giselle, his gaze fixed on the small, flickering candle between them, the soft light casting shadows on the worn wooden walls of the shack. She had let him back into her life, just as she had promised herself she wouldn't. Yet here he was, and for reasons she couldn't fully explain, she didn't want him to leave. There was a part of her that felt she had already lost him once, and the thought of losing him again was something she couldn't bear. But Ulysses, Max, she still didn't know what to call him anymore, looked at her with a vulnerability she hadn't seen before, his eyes shadowed with guilt and regret. He had come back to her, seeking solace, seeking forgiveness, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to give it. She had spent so many nights alone, healing herself from the wound he had left behind, and now that he was back, she was unsure whether she could truly trust him again. "I'm sorry, Giselle," Ulysses said, his voice rough, his words slow and heavy with the weight of all the things he hadn't said before. His hands, still trembling from the journey, rested on the table as if he were trying to steady himself. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving, but now I see how wrong I was. I couldn't understand that I was already lost, even before I walked away from you." His words hung in the room, and Giselle could feel the sincerity in them, even though the wound he had left in her heart was still raw. Giselle didn't speak immediately, instead, letting the silence stretch between them. She could see how much he regretted his decision, but it didn't erase the pain, the loneliness, or the questions that had plagued her since he left. What had he expected her to do? Wait for him forever, to sit in the shack and hope he would come back, just as he had? Her heart ached at the thought, but she knew she needed to hear him out, needed to know why he had come back, why now. "You left me," she said finally, her voice soft but firm, the hurt still fresh in her words. "You left me with nothing but your empty promises and a broken heart. Do you know how that felt?" Her gaze never left his, even though every word felt like it was cutting into her. "I spent so many nights wondering where you were, if you were alive, and when you showed up again, you didn't even have the decency to explain why you left." She stopped, her breath shaky as the flood of emotions threatened to overwhelm her. He lowered his head, his shoulders slumping with the weight of her words. "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know, and I hate myself for it. I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was push you away. I was selfish, and I didn't think about how much it would hurt you." He reached across the table, his hand trembling as he extended it toward hers. "I made a mistake, Giselle. A huge mistake. But I'm here now. I'm not asking for forgiveness right away, but I need you to know that I've come back because I can't live without you. You're the only person who ever saw me for who I truly was." Giselle's heart twisted in her chest, and for a moment, she was unsure whether to pull away from him or lean in. His apology, the sincerity in his eyes, tugged at something deep inside her. She had loved him, truly loved him before he left. And now, despite everything, she still felt that love flicker in her heart. But love, she knew, couldn't erase the past. She needed more than just his words. She needed to see if the man sitting across from her was truly the one she had cared for, or if he was just a shadow of the person he once was. "Why now?" she asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the question. "Why did you come back? After everything you've remembered, after the life you left behind, what made you think I would still want you here?" The anger in her voice was palpable, but so was the vulnerability. She had spent too long putting her heart back together to have it shattered again so easily. Ulysses ran a hand through his damp hair, frustration clouding his features as he struggled to find the right words. "I don't know," he said, his voice strained. "I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't meant to walk away from you. Not like that. The world I left behind, it's not mine anymore. It never was. What I had, what I thought was important, doesn't matter anymore. But you." He paused, his eyes locking with hers, and there was a rawness in them that she hadn't seen before. "You're the only real thing in my life, the only thing that feels like home. For a moment, Giselle felt a flicker of hope, a warmth that spread through her chest. But the warmth was short-lived, replaced by the cold reality of what she had been through. "And what do you want from me now?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. "Do you want me to forget everything? To just pretend like none of this ever happened?" "No," Ulysses said quickly, shaking his head. "I don't expect that. I don't deserve your forgiveness, not yet. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake, and I know it. I've come back because I can't be who I was, not without you. I've lost so much already, and I refuse to lose you too." His hand reached for hers, and this time, she didn't pull away. "I'll do whatever it takes, Giselle. I'll prove to you that I'm not the man who walked away." Giselle felt the heat of his hand on hers, and despite herself, she squeezed it gently. There was something in his touch, in his words, that made her believe, just for a moment, that he meant it. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to trust him. But the fear of being hurt again lingered in the back of her mind. "I don't know if I can forgive you right now," she said quietly, her eyes still locked on his. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see if the man you are now is the one I can trust." He nodded, a look of relief crossing his face, though he knew the road ahead would not be easy. "That's all I can ask for," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Giselle. I won't let you down. I swear." As the candle flickered between them, Giselle felt the weight of the moment settle over her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them. The storm had passed, but their journey was just beginning. And as Ulysses sat there, his hand still in hers, she realized that the hardest part of all had already been done. They had found each other again. The days that followed Ulysses' return were not easy, but they were filled with a determination neither he nor Giselle had expected. There was no instant healing, no magic words that could erase the scars they both carried. The road to rebuilding trust was long and filled with silence, awkward conversations, and moments where neither of them knew exactly how to move forward. But they did move forward, one step at a time, each day a small victory over the past, each hour a reminder of why they had found each other again. Giselle didn't expect things to change overnight, and she knew Ulysses didn't either. The weight of his past, of the life he had left behind, still hung heavy over them both. But as they spent more time together, she began to see glimpses of the man he had been, before the amnesia, before the betrayal, before he had walked away. There were moments, small but significant, where his old self shone through. The way he would make her laugh, the way his eyes would soften when he spoke about the life they were building. For the first time in a long time, Giselle felt that perhaps they could find a way to make their future something new, something real. One evening, as they sat side by side, sorting through the piles of recyclables Giselle had collected, Ulysses looked at her, his gaze steady and serious. "Giselle, I've been thinking," he said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "I know I can't undo the past. I know I can't fix the things I've done, but I want to build something with you, here. A life that's ours, one that doesn't have to be shaped by who I was or the mistakes I made." Giselle stopped what she was doing and looked at him, her heart skipping a beat at the sincerity in his words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice soft but full of curiosity. "I mean, I want to help you. I want to be part of this life with you, in a way that matters," he said, his eyes unwavering. "I've spent so much of my life chasing things that didn't bring me happiness, things that weren't real. But with you, I feel like I'm beginning to understand what matters, and I want to prove that to you. I want to show you that I'm not just the man who walked away, that I'm someone who can build a real future with you." Giselle's breath caught in her throat. She could see the raw honesty in his eyes, the vulnerability in the way he spoke. And for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope that they could rebuild something together. It wasn't just about forgiveness anymore. It was about starting anew, about creating a life that was built on mutual respect, love, and understanding. But even as she felt that hope, a part of her hesitated, wondering if this was just another empty promise. "And how do you think we can do that?" she asked, her voice steady despite the flutter of uncertainty in her chest. "How do we start over when everything we knew has been shattered?" Ulysses reached out and gently took her hand, his grip warm and firm. "We start with small steps. We take what we have and build from there, piece by piece. I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to try, Giselle. I want to work with you, not against you. I want to help you make this life yours, not just mine." Giselle looked at their intertwined hands, the warmth of his touch grounding her in the present. And for the first time since he had returned, she felt like they could make this work. The fear still lingered, but it wasn't as overwhelming as it had been before. There was something in the way Ulysses looked at her now, something that told her he was ready to put in the effort, to make amends, and to build the future they both deserved. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, their new life began to take shape. Ulysses wasn't the man he had once been, the billionaire CEO who had ruled a world of wealth and power. He didn't have the luxury of endless resources or a life filled with luxury. Instead, he worked alongside Giselle, helping her with her scavenging, learning the value of what others discarded, and discovering a world he had never known before. There were moments of frustration, moments when his old life called to him, but he resisted. He had made a promise to be present, to help, to build, and he wasn't willing to break it. One afternoon, as they sat outside the shack, sorting through the piles of discarded metal and glass, Ulysses turned to her and said, "I've been thinking. We've both been scraping by, living off the scraps of others. But we can do more than that. We can create something that lasts. Maybe we can start a small business, one that helps people like us, people who have been forgotten, discarded by society." Giselle looked at him, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and wonder. She had always known that Ulysses was capable of more, but hearing him speak so passionately about helping others, about building something good from nothing, filled her with hope. "Do you think it's possible?" she asked, her voice filled with both doubt and excitement. "To build something like that from here, from nothing?" Ulysses nodded, his eyes bright with determination. "I believe we can. We don't need to be rich to make a difference. We just need to be willing to work hard, to give people the opportunities they deserve, and to show them that they matter. Together, we can create something that will last, a place where people can find hope and rebuild their lives, just like we are doing." And so, with that simple idea, a vision was born. Over the next few months, they worked tirelessly, gathering resources, making connections, and creating a small but growing business that helped others who, like them, had been discarded by society. They built a network of people who worked together, collecting recyclables and repurposing them into something useful, giving discarded materials new life. As they grew, they realized that their mission wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving, about building a future where people mattered, no matter their past. As they sat together one evening, looking at the small but thriving business they had built, Ulysses turned to Giselle, his expression filled with gratitude. "We did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it," Giselle smiled, the weight of everything they had accomplished settling over her like a warm embrace. "We did it together," she said, squeezing his hand. "And we're just getting started." For the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace. They had found their way back to each other, not by ignoring the past, but by embracing it, learning from it, and using it to build something better. Together, they had created a future filled with possibility, hope, and the knowledge that no matter what the world had taken from them, they had the power to rebuild it, piece by piece. Thank you for joining us on this journey with Giselle and Ulysses. Their story is a powerful reminder that no matter how broken we may feel, it's never too late to rebuild, to find redemption, and to create a future built on love, trust, and hope. We'd love to hear your thoughts on their journey. Did their story inspire you? What would you have done in their shoes? Feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments. We're so grateful for your time and for being part of this story. Until next time, take care, keep believing in second chances, and we'll meet again soon with another adventure. Stay inspired.